He waited by the window, the soft glow of the morning sun illuminating his face as he stared across the street. The busy city buzzed with life, cars honking and people rushing, but he felt in that moment like an island in a sea of chaos. His name was Mark, and today was the day everything changed. Inside the small conference room, a meeting was about to begin. The walls were bare and the table was worn, but it held stories of decisions made, of dreams realized and dreams shattered. Mark's heart raced as he watched the clock on the wall, each tick filling the air with urgency. He had spent years working for this moment. For the past decade, he had been in the shadows, learning, watching, waiting. It felt like a lifetime of feeling invisible, a ghost passing through the daily grind of office life, but today he was ready to step into the light. The meeting was to discuss a new project, a chance for everyone to share their ideas. Mark had listened to many ideas over the years, but today he wasn't there to listen. Today he had something important to say. He had worked late nights, pouring himself into research, crafting a plan that could change everything. But self-doubt had always whispered in his ear, telling him to stay quiet, to play it safe, just another face in the crowd. As he paced back and forth by the window, he remembered the countless times he hesitated to speak up in meetings. Once he had nearly shared an idea that could save a major client, but when the time came, his voice had faltered and a coworker took the floor instead. It was that day Mark realized he had to change. He needed to be heard. The door to the conference room opened and he felt a shiver run down his spine. His boss, Lisa, entered with a group of senior managers, chatting and laughing. They took their seats around the table and Mark's heart beat faster. His mind, usually a neat array of plans and ideas, felt like a storm swirling out of control. He took a deep breath and finally found his footing. Mark stepped inside the room, the cool air washing over him. The chatter faded as he walked toward them. He noticed the looks exchanged among the team, some curious, some dismissive. But he had come too far to turn back now. "Good morning, everyone," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Silence met him, a thick wall of caution mixed with skepticism. The very air felt heavy with expectations. Lisa leaned forward, her arms crossed. "We'll start with the regular updates before we get into new ideas, Mark." His heart sank for a moment, but he pressed on. "Actually, Lisa, I think it would be beneficial to hear new ideas first. Our current strategy isn't working as well as we'd hoped." Her brow furrowed with annoyance, but quickly transformed into thoughtful contemplation. There was silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a storm. The power of his voice shocked him. He spoke about his idea with passion and energy, weaving through the details with clarity. He watched their faces closely. Some nodded, while others jotted down notes. He could feel their skepticism beginning to crack. This was more than just business for him. It was a chance to prove his worth, to show that he belonged. As he reached the climax of his pitch, it was as if the room had shifted. The tension that loomed over them morphed into something electrifying. He finished with a confident smile, almost surprised at himself. There was a moment of silence, and then the questions came. Each question felt like a challenge, but instead of retreating, Mark engaged with them. For every question, he had a well-thought-out answer. He was no longer the observer, he was right in the thick of it. He could feel the walls tumbling down. The managers who had once ignored him were actually listening. Their skepticism was fading, curiosity took its place. For the first time, he felt seen. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a moment, then spoke from the heart. "I've seen us struggle with our current strategy. I know how it feels to work late and not see the results we want." His honesty hung in the air like sunlight breaking through the clouds. The room shifted again. He could see the change in their expressions. Lisa looked thoughtful, her arms unfolding. "You have a point." Mark's heart soared. He noticed other team members smiling, nodding. His mind raced to the years of waiting, of holding back. Was this really happening? Finally, as they moved deeper into the discussion, the mood lightened. Ideas bounced around like sparks of electricity. Mark felt a surge of hope. He was no longer an invisible man hiding in the corner. He had stepped into the spotlight. As the meeting wrapped up, Lisa turned to Mark. "Great job today, Mark." Her words felt like a warm blanket on a chilly night. He took his seat at the head of the table, not out of arrogance, but out of sheer relief. He had fought for his voice, and today it was loud and clear. Later that afternoon, Mark sat at his desk, a mixture of disbelief and joy flooding his mind. The events of the day played on repeat in his head. He was buzzing with adrenaline, fully absorbing the reality that he had taken a step that once felt impossible. Each tap of his fingers on the keyboard was a reminder that he had a voice, an idea worth sharing. Days turned into weeks, and what started as a hesitant idea blossomed into a full-fledged project. The team worked together, collaborating in a way they never had before. They laughed in the office, celebrated small wins, and strategized late into the night. Mark felt a camaraderie forming, a bond built on shared vision and determination, but challenges came as well. There were moments of doubt when deadlines loomed and deliverables were questioned. In these moments, Mark felt the weight of leadership. It scared him at times, but he had faced fears before, and he found comfort in the support of his team. Each setback taught him something new: how to adapt, how to pivot, and most importantly, how to communicate openly. One day, as the sun dipped low in the sky, marking the end of another long day, the team gathered for a final check-in. They discussed numbers, outcomes, and what was next. Mark watched the team members speak, their faces alive with passion. It was clear together they had become something more than coworkers, they had become a community. As the meeting wrapped up, Mark took a moment to reflect. He recognized how far he had come, from waiting by the window, afraid to speak, to confidently taking a seat at the head of the table. He had faced his fears and found his voice, but more importantly, he had discovered the power of collaboration. The journey hadn't been easy, but as he looked around the room, he saw the faces of his team illuminated by the warm glow of the setting sun. They were all in this together, lifting each other up, trying to reach new heights. In the end, it wasn't just about Mark's idea winning. It was about a collective effort, a shared dream, and the realization that sometimes waiting by the window is just the first step. The real growth happens when you decide to step into the room, claim your place, and be heard. He waited by the window, holding his breath, a knot of tension coiling in his stomach. Outside, the world moved in a blur, cars honking, pedestrians bustling, life happening without him. But on that chilly Tuesday morning, Mark was not just another face in the crowd. Today, he stood on the brink of a decision that could change everything, to step forward or stay hidden in the shadows. As he stared across the busy street, he pictured the conference room on the 10th floor, where an important meeting was about to unfold. The thought sent jolts of electric anticipation through his veins. Today was his day to speak up, to share his ideas, to be seen. He could feel the thrill and fear warring within him. Mark had often found himself waiting by the window. In the last 5 years at his job, he'd become a quiet observer, a diligent worker who rarely pushed for attention. He believed in hard work and letting results speak for themselves. But while he had been slaving away behind the scenes, others were stepping into the spotlight, seizing opportunities he had always shied away from. Months of listening to louder voices, watching colleagues take risks that he was too afraid to, had shaped a rising tide of frustration within him. He would wonder as he chewed on his lunch in the break room, listening to the chatter around him. But he had his reasons for staying small, reasons that felt comforting. Every time he thought about speaking up, self-doubt wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. His ideas weren't good enough. It was better to stay in the background. Today, however, felt different. The sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the floor, illuminating his raw determination. This morning was an awakening, a moment marked by clarity. He pulled his gaze from the window and turned towards the conference room door, where he could slowly see his teammates trickling in, friends, co-workers, rivals, each one carrying their own hopes, ideas, and insecurities. He took a deep breath, a gust of cold air filling his lungs, and stepped away from the window. Every step felt heavy, like walking through mud, but his mind was a storm of thoughts and strategies. He had prepared for this. He had shaped an idea that could turn the tide for their struggling project. It was time to unveil it, to stand tall at the head of the table instead of lurking in its shadows. Entering the conference room, Mark's heart raced. The small space felt suffocating, every corner echoing his anxiety. He scanned the table. Lisa, his boss, leaned back in her chair, arms folded, an air of authority surrounding her. His colleagues chattered about the usual mundane incidents, oblivious to his inner turmoil. As he took a seat, a few heads turned, curiosity tinged with skepticism hovering in the air. Mark kept his eyes down, fidgeting with a pen, but inside the fire burned hotter. He had data and insights he was itching to share, but the chilling whisper of doubt pressed against him, urging him to retreat, to silence himself once again. He felt like a lone soldier about to charge into battle, armor made of hope and uncertainty. The meeting unfolded, predictable and routine. Updates were shared, numbers tossed around like confetti, and yet beneath the surface he felt a rising tide of unease. Mark realized then that the project they were working on was floundering, sinking under the weight of stagnant ideas and dwindling morale. It was time to swim or sink. As Lisa began to steer the conversation towards a lack of excitement in their proposal, Mark straightened up. His pulse thundered in his ears. Was this the moment? Had it come? He looked around the room, faces expectant and worn, and the decision crystallized. The words tumbled out before he could second-guess themselves. The chatter ceased, and all eyes turned toward him. It felt like a spotlight burning into his skin, but he embraced it. This was his moment. His voice took on a steadiness he didn't know he possessed. I've developed a new approach that could not only reinvigorate our project, but also align with our company goals. Tension crackled in the air. Lisa raised an eyebrow, and the rest of the team shifted in their seats, caught between curiosity and doubt. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Mark launched into his proposal, words flowing faster than he expected. He outlined a creative solution filled with fresh perspectives and solid statistics, each idea building upon the last. He could see nods from some, while others took copious notes. His palms were clammy, but the adrenaline surged, propelling him forward. This was a different Mark, a Mark who refused to let fear dictate his voice any longer. James, a more experienced colleague, interjected, challenging him but also inviting additional depth to the discussion. The question sent a jolt through Mark, sparking clarity. Honestly, I've seen the struggle, he said, allowing a moment of vulnerability to peek through his confidence. We've all felt the pressure to produce results. I know how it feels to be overwhelmed by deadlines and stress. The room felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. He saw colleagues leaning in, intrigued. Their skepticism was softening, giving way to a flicker of interest. Mark pressed on, feeding off their energy, weaving personal anecdotes into his proposal that connected him more deeply to the project. As he spoke, he envisioned the team working together, overcoming obstacles, not just as individuals but as a united front. When he concluded, a heavy silence hung over the table, a moment suspended in time. What would they say? Would they dismiss him as he had feared, or had he done enough to earn their attention? Then Lisa spoke. "I appreciate you stepping up," Mark crossed her face. As discussions spiraled into a collaborative frenzy, ideas bounced around like pinballs. Mark felt a rush of exhilaration. The weight on his chest began to lift. This was no longer just about him. It was about the collective vision they would create together. The room transformed. They brainstormed, argued, laughed, and strategized until the sun dipped lower, filling the room with a warm glow. Mark watched his coworkers' faces illuminated with passion, and he thought about how far this moment had come. From the boy waiting by the window, unsure and invisible, to a man standing at the head of the table, crafting the future. But challenges soon emerged. With their new idea came the need for adaptation, resistance from those used to the status quo, pushback from departments reluctant to change. As he faced these hurdles, Mark felt the weight of responsibility. The path he had set them on was not easy. It was filled with tough conversations, late nights, and moments of doubt creeping back in. It was during one of these hard times, staring at a wall of rejection emails, that Mark felt himself teetering on the edge of despair. What if he had overstepped? What if his bravery was misplaced? He spent sleepless nights wrestling with his thoughts, wondering if he would lose the trust he had built. But with each sunrise, a flicker of determination ignited in him. Remembering the struggles he had faced and how far he had come, he would refuse to slide back into invisibility. He would tackle the challenges head-on and guide his team through the storms they faced. In a pivotal meeting a week later, Mark gathered the team together. He openly discussed their setbacks, acknowledging the difficulties but highlighting the growth they had experienced as a group. "Every great project faces resistance," he said, his voice steady. "We can either fold under pressure or face it together." It was as if his words struck a chord, and one by one their spirits lifted. Slowly, the tide began to change. New ideas emerged, a renewed sense of collaboration took root, and they forged ahead stronger together than they had ever been. Finally, the day came when they presented their new strategy to upper management. The conference room buzzed with energy, and this time Mark was not just presenting, he was leading. The once timid man who waited by the window now stood confidently at the forefront. As he spoke, he looked at the faces in the room, a mix of skepticism lingering but hope beginning to rise. He felt their energy, curiosities peaked, walls still standing but softening. He was no longer waiting, he was commanding their attention. When the presentation concluded, a wave of applause filled the air. Lisa stood up first, clapping with enthusiasm. "Fantastic work, team," cheers erupted, and Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In that moment, surrounded by his teammates, the people who had supported him, someone who had begun to see himself as a catalyst for change, he felt triumphant, not just for the project but for the people he had grown with. He was no longer just a participant, he was an integral piece of the puzzle. As the days rolled into weeks, Mark settled into his new role, one filled with meetings and collaborations, challenges and victories. Each step he took seeped confidence into his veins. No longer waiting by the window, a new chapter blossomed, not just for him but for everyone around him. And that fateful Tuesday morning, when he took that first uncertain step, rippled out. It created waves of change within his team and beyond. Every voice mattered, he realized. Every idea had the power to make waves, and sometimes all it took was one brave step forward to inspire others to take theirs. He waited by the window, heart racing, palms sweating as the world hustled by outside. It was a drizzly Wednesday morning, the kind that made everything look dull and worn, but Mark didn't notice the gray skies or the rain-soaked streets. He was trapped in a storm of his own making. Inside the office, the usual buzz of voices and ringing phones faded away as his mind raced. Today was the day he would pitch the idea that had kept him awake for weeks. He had stayed up late, drafting plans and worksheets, pouring his heart into every word. Yet here he was, staring out the window, frozen. What if they laughed? What if they dismissed him? The very notion of standing up in front of his colleagues made his stomach churn. But what choice did he have? His project was on life support, gasping for breath, and it needed a new direction. The stakes were high, and that pressure was like a vice clamping around his chest. Just then, the clock on the wall chimed, bringing him back to reality. The meeting was about to start, and he could see the others filtering into the conference room, their expressions animated, their voices filled with energy. Each laugh and joke they shared felt like a fist to his gut, reminding him of the camaraderie he felt so distant from. He could see Lisa, his boss, sliding into her chair with an air of authority. Her face was familiar kind, yet imposing, encouraging yet relentless. She made decisions with confidence that he could only dream of, but today he needed to break free from his self-imposed shackles. He needed to take a seat at the table, not just any seat, but the one at the head of the meeting. And away from the window, shaking off the doubt like water dripped from an umbrella. Today was going to be different. With every step toward the conference room, his confidence grew. He walked past colleagues who exchanged friendly glances and small smiles, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. As he reached for the doorknob, time slowed. He could almost hear the echo of his heart thump, thump, thump like a war drum preparing him for battle. Then he pushed the door open. The room quieted instantly. All eyes landed on him, curiosity mixed with an inkling of skepticism. The table, with its polished surface and neatly arranged notebooks, seemed to tower over him. He took a seat, his usual place, on the far side, distant and uninvolved, but that wasn't where he wanted to be. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down. Lisa began the meeting, glancing around the table, gesturing towards the project files spread out like a map of their failures. "We need to address the performance of our latest launch," she said, her tone brisk. The air in the room thickened, tension stacking like bricks. Others began to chime in, their voices rising with frustration and disappointment. Mark felt the familiar waves of self-doubt crashing over him. The voices rattled around his mind, and he feared they would pull him back into the shadows. But then something unexpected happened. A realization washed over him, a flicker of something alive and bold. These conversations, the bickering, the uncertainty were the exact reason he had worked so hard on his idea. He couldn't just sit back and watch them drown in despair. He straightened in his chair, adrenaline coursing through him. The words tumbled out, surprising even himself. The chatter subsided, and the room turned its full attention to him. The weight of their gazes felt both heavy and liberating. Lisa nodded, a slight smile teasing her lips. Taking a moment to center himself, he gazed at his team, his friends, his allies. "I think we need to rethink our approach." The murmurs began, a mixture of skepticism and interest rippling through the group. Someone asked, the challenge igniting his rising confidence. Mark plunged forward. He had visualized this moment countless times. He outlined his plan, each point flowing effortlessly from his mouth. He spoke of new innovations, fresh strategies that could align their goals with the market's needs. As he spoke, he could see them leaning in, intrigue dancing in their eyes. But just as he began to feel the momentum shift, the questions came like arrows. Each question felt like a weighted stone thrown at his fragile fortress of confidence, but instead of retreating, he engaged them. For every question posed, he had a prepared answer, grounded in research and passion. "True, the numbers are a concern, but I believe we can reallocate resources to target our key demographics more effectively," he explained. As he spoke, a buzz filled the room. Ideas, insights, and possibilities took flight. Each person around the table began to build on his vision, their voices weaving together like a tapestry of hope. Mark felt buoyed by their enthusiasm. It was as if they were all rising together, hand in hand toward a common goal. And in that moment, he realized he wasn't just presenting an idea. He was part of a movement, a shift in momentum that could distinguish them within the industry. Mark hesitated for only a breath. Here was the chance to reveal the heart of his project, the very essence of why he had fought so hard to speak up. "I've been where we are now, struggling, feeling lost. I know the pressure of targets and the frustration of missed opportunities." Silence fell, but not one of discomfort. Instead, it was filled with understanding. Mark could see the shift. The skepticism was melting, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The flickers of doubt in their eyes had transformed into something bright and promising. Lisa finally broke the silence, leaning forward as if to weave her focus into the shared energy. "I appreciate your initiative, Mark." She turned to the rest of the team. A chorus of muted agreement echoed, and the atmosphere felt electric. Ideas swirled around as they delved deeper into Mark's proposal, refining it like a precious stone. Time slipped away unnoticed, the clock ticking on as enthusiasm filled the room. But even as the meeting came to a close, doubt lingered in the back of his mind, whispering that it couldn't last. He had felt the mix of excitement and caution before, but as the discussions continued to flow, he pushed the fears aside. Time was different, he was different. When the meeting finally ended, he felt light as air. The tension that had draped over him like a cloak lifted, revealing the bright hope of possibility. As the team trickled out, Mark lingered, a sense of accomplishment radiating from him. Lisa approached, a warm smile breaking through her usual seriousness. "Great job today, Mark. I was impressed with how you led the discussion." He could hardly believe her words. After years of stepping back, he felt fully seen. There it was again, the warmth of possibility blooming within him, but with new beginnings came fresh challenges. Over the next few weeks, implementation was harder than he anticipated. An unexpected backlash emerged from certain colleagues, resistant to the changes they were trying to implement. Frustration bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to boil over as opposition crept in like a shadow. Mark found himself doubting his leadership. Had he been too bold? Had he crossed a line? Questions cascaded through his mind like raindrops against window panes. But then he would remember the room, the energy, the connection. He would remember why he took the risk in the first place. One late night, as he sat alone in the office, staring at a wall of sticky notes filled with ideas, Mark felt the weight creeping back in. It was as if every negative thought threatened to drag him under. But he also remembered that feeling of exhilaration when the team had rallied around him. He had to remind himself of their shared vision. Every great venture faces obstacles, he muttered to himself, pushing back against the tide of self-doubt. The next morning, energized by his quiet resolve, he gathered the team together again. "I know things have been tough, but we need to keep pushing forward. We've come too far to turn back," he said, determination burning in his chest. His sincerity resonated with them. Slowly they began to share their concerns, frustrations spilling out into the open air. It became a cathartic release, an acknowledgement of reality weighed down by the burdens of expectations. One by one they unpacked their worries, and through that moment of vulnerability, trust was forged anew. Mark guided the discussion back toward solutions. Together, they brainstormed fixes, and the tension began to lift as fresh energy coursed through them. It felt like a rebirth, collectively rising to tackle the challenges they forged ahead. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a hesitant idea had blossomed into a renewed vision for their team. The moments spent laboring over plans transformed into a palpable excitement that filled the office, marking their growth. They presented their evolving strategy to upper management, who listened intently. As praises flowed during the follow-up meeting, Mark felt a rush of fulfillment, a validation of everything he had overcome. The chaos of hesitation gave way to a new confidence that felt almost invincible. He was a part of something bigger, and he could feel it pushing him forward. Finally, as Mark took a moment to reflect, he saw the journey unfold before his eyes, the fear by the window, the hesitation, the transformation. No longer waiting, he had taken the seat at the head of the meeting. He had stepped into his power, transforming not just his own path, but the path of a team that would stand united. And with that awareness, with every struggle faced and every obstacle overcome, he knew one thing for sure. Courage is often born from the quietest moments, waiting to be spoken into the world. Every voice matters, but sometimes it just takes one person, standing firm and unyielding, to inspire an entire team to rise up together. He waited by the window, heart pounding like a drum in his chest, as raindrops raced down the glass. Outside, the world moved in a blur. Cars splashed through puddles, people huddled under umbrellas, and life continued oblivious to the storm raging inside him. Today was critical, a turning point that could either propel him forward or sink him back into the shadows. Mark glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking echoing in his ears like a countdown. The meeting he had both dreaded and yearned for loomed closer. He had spent endless nights molding a brilliant idea, one he believed could save his floundering project. But as he gripped the edge of the window's ledge, doubt threatened to drown his courage. He remembered the countless moments he had watched from the sidelines. Colleagues spoke up, shared bold ideas, and claimed their space at the table, but Mark was different, a quiet observer. He worked diligently, believing that hard work alone would be enough to earn him respect. He didn't want the spotlight, he wanted to contribute from the back. Yet with each passing day, he felt that familiar frustration creeping closer, suffocating his ambitions. Mark pushed himself away from the window, adrenaline rushing through him. Today had to be different, no more waiting. He took a long breath, envisioning his well-crafted presentation, the graphs and charts that would bring his vision to life. This wasn't just about him. It was a chance to turn around a project teetering on the edge. It was a step toward being seen, taken seriously, and leading the charge. Stepping into the conference room, Mark felt the weight of every eye turning toward him. The hum of conversation faded, replaced by a stillness that felt both intimidating and electrifying. Lisa, his boss, sat at the head of the table, her expression a mixture of expectation and scrutiny. She was a force of nature, and today she would determine the future of their venture. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice steady. "Let's get started." Mark's heart sank at her words. He could see it, the dissatisfaction dancing across the faces of his teammates. Surely they felt as lost as he did. The tone was grim, but he couldn't let this moment slip away. He had prepared. He had analyzed their data, researched their competitors, and crafted a plan. But first, he had to break free from the chains of doubt. With a sudden surge of determination, Mark raised his hand. The request tumbled out of him, surprising even himself. The room went quiet, a mix of curiosity and skepticism brewing like storm clouds. "Go ahead, Mark," Lisa said, leaning slightly forward. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down, but he could also feel the flicker of hope rising from the depths of his fear. "I've been thinking about our current strategy," he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. A few heads nodded, but he could see others holding back. Was he losing them already? No. He pressed on, detailing his idea shift in their marketing strategy that would target a younger demographic. He laid out data, weaving statistics with storytelling. With each passing moment, he could feel their attention shifting towards him, drink in hand, listening. "Imagine if we use social media influencers to engage potential customers," he said, excitement threading through his voice. The chatter began again, this time peppered with intrigue. He had their attention, and with that attention came the rush of adrenaline he craved. Each question hit him like a pulse of energy. Instead of retreating, he leaned into the pressure. "Great questions," he responded, fueling their growing interest. "We can start with a pilot campaign, choose a few influencers that align with our brand, and monitor engagement closely." As he spoke, something incredible happened. Colleagues leaned in further, engaged and enthusiastic, contributing their thoughts, sharing their ideas. A team that had felt lost moments ago was now buoyed by the currents of creativity and collaboration. Mark felt the fire igniting around him, a collective spark that resonated deeply. But just as the energy peaked, a voice cut through the excitement. "Mark, this all sounds great, but how do you justify the costs?" It was Alex, a longtime employee known for his no-nonsense attitude. Wave of tension surged through the room. Mark took a deep breath. Yes, he had anticipated pushback. He remembered how he used to shy away from such confrontations, but today was different. "That's a valid point, Alex," he replied, meeting his gaze confidently. "But if we don't invest in engaging our audience, we're risking further losses." The room hushed, a moment of reflection settling over the team. They were weighing the risks and rewards, pondering not just the numbers, but the potential for change. And Mark, sensing that they were on the cusp of something great, leaned into the silence. "Think about it, when was the last time you felt excited about our brand?" Lisa's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly with consideration. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mark." His heart soared, it felt real. For the first time, he could see himself at the helm of this conversation, not just a bystander waiting for his turn. Other voices chimed in, each adding layers to his proposal as everyone began to collaborate, feeding off one another's ideas, their spirits tangling together like vines reaching for the sun. Days turned into weeks, and their initial idea blossomed into a full-fledged campaign. Mark found himself swept up in the energy of the project, igniting a passion that had long lain dormant. He delved into research, met with potential influencers, and crafted strategies that spoke to the heart of their audience. But triumph was not without trials. Pushback came from unexpected quarters. Management questioned expenditures, and old-school marketing veterans scoffed at the new way of doing things. Each setback felt like a punch to the gut, igniting the familiar ghosts of self-doubt. Was he being reckless? Had he overstepped his bounds? Late nights turned into early mornings as Mark grappled with these doubts, tossing and turning in bed as anxiety laced through his dreams. But the flicker of hope that had ignited during that meeting kept calling him back. He had seen his team come alive. He had felt the surge of connection and support that bloomed as they rallied together. With renewed vigor, Mark called another meeting. He needed to remind everyone why they had chosen this path. As he stood at the front of the room, his heart surged with purpose. "We're at a crossroads. I know changes can feel daunting, but this is our chance to redefine who we are. To transform not just our project, but our brand." As he spoke, he could see the subtle shifts in expression across the room. Heads nodded and eyes sparkled with anticipation. The fire that had once blazed dimly flickered back to life. They began to share their own concerns, speak their truths, and bash their worries. Every voice mattered. The atmosphere shifted from reluctant acceptance to collective courage. "Let's keep pushing on," Mark urged, his tone steady and confident. "Let's own this moment. We're here to create change." Once again, the energy surged and ideas flowed freely. While they faced continued skepticism from higher-ups, Mark found strength in his team's shared belief. Together, they crafted an approach that aligned with their budget, focusing on a more targeted social media strategy. The day of the presentation arrived. Standing before management, Mark felt a cascade of anticipation and anxiety swirling within him. This time, though, he was armed not just with visuals and data. He had the backing of his team, their collective energy coursing through him. As he spoke, he could see nods of agreement mixing with skepticism, but he pressed on, passionately illuminating the potential of their campaign. The room, filled with powerful figures and industry veterans, crackled with tension. This was it, the moment he had waited for, the chance to showcase their hard work. When he finished, silence hung in the air, heavy and expectant. Finally, Lisa spoke. "I'm impressed, Mark. You've rallied your team and crafted a strong proposal." As different voices chimed in, some supportive, others apprehensive, Mark felt the energy in the room shift, stronger and more united than ever before. He watched as they built on one another's ideas, their concerns morphing into commitments. They were no longer just Mark's ideas, they belonged to all of them. Days later, when the announcement came that their strategy had been approved, Mark felt a wave of euphoria wash over him. He exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. His colleagues cheered, laughter ringing through the office, dispelling the shadows of doubt that had once loomed so large. As the campaign rolled out, everything came together. The energy, excitement, and engagement skyrocketed. Mark watched as their audience began to respond, their brand transforming before his eyes. It garnered attention and respect, not just from their consumers, but also from their competitors. He realized through all the ups and downs that he had grown too. The man waiting by the window had evolved into a leader, someone willing to lean into the discomfort and rise. Mark took pride in what they had accomplished, not just for the project, but for the unity they had forged as a team. Over that long and arduous journey, he learned the profound power of taking up space, of claiming a seat at the table. No longer just the quiet observer, he had become a voice for change, an advocate for innovation, and a champion for collaboration. Looking back, Mark could see the path unfurling behind him, a tapestry woven together with moments of fear and triumph. Each step had mattered. Waiting by the window was merely the beginning, and taking that seat at the head of the meeting had set him on a journey of discovery, a journey that unveiled not just the project's potential but also his own. He waited by the window, heart racing as the rain streaked down the glass. Outside, the city was alive with movement, people hurried by with umbrellas, cars splashed through puddles, and life unfolded in a vibrant blur. But inside him, a storm brewed, filled with anxiety and uncertainty. Today was the day he would either step into the spotlight or go back to the shadows. Mark glanced at the clock on the wall, watching the minutes tick away. The meeting was about to begin, and it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. He could practically hear the clock mocking him, each tick like a pulse of dread. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now, faced with the reality of it, he felt small and vulnerable. This wasn't just any meeting, it was a high-stakes presentation that would determine the future of a struggling project. Mark had always been the quiet one, always waiting for the right moment to speak up. He had seen brilliant ideas thrown around the conference table, ideas that he had kept to himself. The time for silence had to come to an end. He thought of the last few years, filled with missed opportunities and whispers of self-doubt. Each time he watched someone else take a risk, he felt a wrenching in his gut, a reminder of all the times he had held back. He had convinced himself that if he worked hard enough, someone would notice him eventually. But who was he kidding? In a world of bold personalities, he had become invisible. But today, as he stood there watching the rain fall, something shifted within him. He remembered the countless nights he had spent crafting a plan, pouring himself into every detail of his proposal. Maybe this was the moment to break the cycle. Maybe he could be more than just a spectator in his own life. Mark took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs like an awakening. No more waiting. He straightened his back and turned away from the window, heading towards the conference room with determined steps. He pushed open the heavy door, and suddenly the world outside fell away. The air inside was thick with anticipation as his colleagues settled into their chairs, some flipping through papers, others tapping away on laptops. Lisa, his boss, was already seated at the head of the table, an unreadable expression on her face. "All right, everyone, let's begin," she announced, her voice steady and commanding. "We need to discuss where we stand with the project," she continued, and there was an undercurrent of frustration in her tone that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. As they reviewed the project details, a sense of dread settled in. The numbers were grim, the feedback was lackluster, and all he could hear were murmurs of disappointment. People nodded along, murmuring agreement, and Mark felt his heart sinking deeper with each passing moment. This was it, the moment to change everything. Finally, he couldn't hold back any longer. His voice broke into the conversation. The words spilled out, catching everyone off guard. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. "Yes, Mark," Lisa said, turning her attention toward him. He hesitated for a heartbeat, the anxiety clawing at him, but he pushed through it. "I think we need to rethink our entire approach." He saw a flicker of interest in the eyes around the table. Maybe they recognized something familiar in his struggle. Maybe they too felt the need for a shift. He pressed on, detailing his vision for a new campaign that focused on authenticity, an appeal to their audience that spoke to their real experiences rather than just selling a product. As he shared his ideas, Mark felt a rush of energy. His passion spilled forth, igniting a fire in his belly, illuminating the dark corners of his self-doubt. He spoke about the importance of connecting with consumers on a deeper level, establishing genuine relationships rather than chasing fleeting trends. Questions ricocheted around the table. Each question was a challenge, but for the first time, instead of retreating, he engaged in the dialogue. He answered thoughtfully, offering solid data to back up his claims, pulling from the work he had put in. But then he felt a curious tension in the room. Someone had their doubts. It was Alex, a seasoned veteran known for his critical thinking. "Mark, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but can we really shift our whole strategy?" Mark's heart raced, his confidence wavering for a moment, but then he remembered the feeling he had while preparing, the belief that had driven him to this point. "Every strategy carries risk," he replied, meeting Alex's gaze. "But isn't it riskier to do nothing at all? If we keep taking the same approach, we're setting ourselves up for failure." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. He could see them slowly warming to his ideas, the tension shifting. Lisa nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Okay, Mark, you've given us a lot to consider." As they broke off into smaller discussions, Mark felt a surge of hope. Different voices began to echo ideas he had shared, building on them, transforming a single spark into a growing fire. For the first time, he felt part of something bigger, a team coming alive with possibility. The very atmosphere shifted from one of skepticism to exploration. Hours flew by as they collaborated, laughter and vibrant conversations filling the space. Mark lost track of time, and for the first time in a long while, he felt free from the weight of his insecurities, free from waiting for permission. A newfound confidence surged through him as if he had finally claimed his place at the table. As the meeting concluded, Lisa gathered everyone together again. "I want to thank Mark for stepping up today." The words washed over him like a balm, soothing the rough edges of his anxiety. Days turned into weeks, and the campaign began to take shape. Mark immersed himself in every detail, bringing his ideas to life through brainstorming sessions, mock-ups, and plans. He felt like an architect building something worthwhile instead of waiting by the window, watching life pass him by. But despite the excitement, challenges began to emerge. The terrain was rocky. There were arguments over budget, disagreements about targeted demographics, and endless adjustments to the campaign strategy. Mark found himself staring at walls of resistance that threatened to halt their progress. Late one night, sitting at his desk, he felt frustration bubbling within him. Had he been wrong to push so hard? Taking risks was one thing, facing failure was another. He glanced out the window just as he had weeks before, the darkness of night enveloping the city. He felt drained, the weight of expectations pressing down on him. But then he thought of his team, the bright sparks of ideas that had ignited that day in the conference room. They were counting on him just as he had counted on himself to be brave. He remembered the thrill of stepping into the conversation and the transformation they had all experienced together. With renewed resolve, he gathered the team again. "I know it's been tough, I can feel the pressure, but we need to keep moving forward. Let's regroup and refocus on our core message." As he spoke, he could see their spirits lifting, the fire rekindling. They shared frustrations and renewed their commitments. He guided them through another round of brainstorming, and together they found a way to adapt the campaign rather than abandon it. Their unity shifted the energy from exhaustion to motivation, transforming doubt into determination. As the days rolled on, their hard work paid off. The campaign launched, and the response from their audience was overwhelmingly positive. Engagement skyrocketed, social media buzzed with excitement. People connected with their message, and the brand began to thrive. Mark felt a surge of elation as he watched the impact of their efforts unfold. He transformed from a timid employee waiting by the window into a leader steering a ship through stormy waters. The confidence he had cultivated echoed through every interaction, every decision. The waiting game was over. He was in the game now. Weeks later, the team gathered in the same conference room for a final review of the campaign's performance. Lisa grinned as she shared the metric sales increases, skyrocketing engagement, and accolades streaming in from the industry. "I couldn't be more proud of this team," she said, and Mark's heart swelled with pride. As the team shared high fives and laughter, he realized that he was no longer just a part of the group. He had become instrumental in shaping its identity. The confidence he felt radiated from him, not as arrogance but as genuine belief in himself and each of his teammates. Sitting at the head of the table that day, Mark reflected on his journey, how he had once waited by the window, fear driving him to silence. He absorbed the faces around him, each one illuminated by the victory they had achieved together. They were a tapestry of voices, experiences, and dreams all entwined into something powerful. Transformation happened not just in strategies and presentations, but within himself. He had learned that even in moments of uncertainty, courage could seek its own path. Stepping into discomfort had been necessary to create change for both the team and himself. Mark's story had become a testament to seizing the moment, breaking free from silence, and transforming fear into strength. He had taken the seat at the head of the meeting, not out of arrogance, but out of a commitment to collective growth. And in doing so, he discovered his own power, not just as an employee, but as a leader. And so, as the rain continued to fall outside, marking the passage of time, Mark knew that the time for waiting was over. He was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that true change came from those daring to take a stand, challenge the status quo, and forge a new path together. He waited by the window, his breath fogging up the glass as he stared out into the stormy city beyond. Raindrops raced against the pane, blurring the world outside, a world bustling with life, yet he felt trapped in a bubble of doubt. Inside him, a whirlwind of emotions churned, excitement, fear, longing, and hope. Today was important. Today was the day Mark would step into the spotlight or remain forever in the shadows. He glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking down the moments until the meeting began. The weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air, each tick amplifying his anxiety. Mark had spent the last few weeks refining his proposal. Late nights had bled into early mornings as he pored over data, meticulously crafting a plan that he hoped would breathe new life into a floundering project. But now, as the time approached, what had once been confidence began to morph back into the familiar coils of worry. What if they laughed? What if they dismissed him entirely? He turned away from the window and walked toward the conference room, each step a battle against the whirlwind of thoughts fighting for dominance in his mind. He remembered the last meeting, where others had shared their bold ideas, and how he'd sat quietly, a spectator in his own life. It was painful to feel invisible among peers who seemed fearless, but today he'd promised himself he would change that. Today he would take action. Today he'd show them what he was capable of, not just for himself, but for the team and the project they all cared about. As he entered the conference room, Mark felt the familiar rush of anxiety. The room buzzed with chatter, filled with uncertainty about the future of their project. Lisa, his manager, sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of her team. She exuded confidence, her presence dominating the space. "All right, everyone," Lisa began. "Let's get to it." Mark could feel the heaviness in the air as she mentioned the project's struggles. The words not meeting expectations hung like a dark cloud. He shifted in his chair, feeling the walls close in. This was it, the moment to seize or to lose. As updates was shared around the table, Mark listened, each word knitting a tighter web of anxiety around him. Others expressed their frustrations, their voices a blend of resignation and determination. It was clear they all felt the pressure. They had been fighting against the tide for so long. Then, in a moment of clarity, Mark felt a spark ignite within him. He had been waiting for the right time, but he realized that the right time was now. He cleared his throat, feeling the weight of their gazes upon him. His voice broke through the tension, startling even himself. The room quieted, eyes turning to him with a mix of curiosity and surprise. "Go ahead, Mark," Lisa encouraged, her expression shifting to one of interest. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I've been thinking a lot about our approach. I believe we need to pivot. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. It's not working." The murmurs of doubt were palpable, but he pressed on, fueled by an urgency he'd never felt before. "We should consider integrating social media influencers into our marketing strategy." He poured out his vision, each word woven with conviction. He spoke about how brands that leveraged influencers tapped into trust and relatability. "We create campaigns that resonate with people's lives, not just their wallets," he said, feeling the energy in the room shift. Some colleagues nodded, their expressions intrigued. Others, however, wore skeptical masks. Mark could see questions forming in their minds, doubt crystallizing in their expressions. He braced himself, the fight-or-flight response whispering temptingly to retreat. "Mark," chimed in Alex, a seasoned employee known for his no-nonsense attitude, "that sounds great, but how do you justify the costs?" For a moment, Mark felt the ground shift beneath him. He had anticipated pushback, yet hearing those words hit him like a punch to the gut. Doubt threatened to creep back in. But then he remembered his purpose, why he stood here today. If he backed down now, all the late nights and early mornings would be for nothing. He met Alex's gaze with steady resolve. "That's a fair point, Alex," he said, "but I believe the cost is justified by the potential returns." The room fell silent for a moment, everyone's attention firmly on him. Mark could feel the pulse of possibility rising, a tangible energy swirling as people began to engage in the conversation. There was fresh interest in their eyes, a glimmer of curiosity igniting like tiny flames. "Let's break into smaller groups," Lisa finally suggested, her voice authoritative yet open. As they split into groups, Mark felt a rush of hope wash over him. Colleagues began throwing out ideas, brainstorming different angles for the campaign. As discussions ebbed and flowed, he felt like a part of something greater, a hive mind working toward a common goal. The energy in the room transformed, sparking a creative frenzy. Ideas merged, transformed, and evolved in front of them. Someone suggested integrating user-generated content alongside influencer marketing. Another added the idea of launching a contest to spread awareness. Mark felt the weight of their shared aspirations, a bridge forming between his vision and their collective involvement. When the meeting concluded, the atmosphere was electric with excitement. Lisa smiled at him, pride shining in her eyes. "Great work today, Mark." Each day that followed brought a whirlwind of activity. Mark poured himself into developing the campaign, collaborating with different teams to bring their ideas to life. What had started as a timid voice by the window now rang out with authority, guiding the team through challenges and victories alike. But as momentum built, so too did the setbacks. There were late nights of frustrating meetings filled with unresolved conflicts, budget cuts, differing priorities, and lingering doubt crept in like shadows. Each setback felt heavier than the last, weighing down on the optimism they had cultivated. One evening, after a particularly grueling discussion, Mark sat alone in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. How had things gone so wrong? The glow of his monitor illuminated his frustration, and he felt that familiar emptiness creeping back in. Had he pushed too hard? Had he been too ambitious? But then he thought about his team. He remembered their faces, the excitement they had felt during that brainstorming session, the laughter shared, and the collective drive to create something meaningful. They were depending on each other, and he could not let doubt deter him now. Gathering his thoughts, he called a quick meeting. He needed to remind them all of their purpose, the fire that had initially ignited their creativity. "I know we've faced challenges," Mark began, addressing the team with sincere intensity, "but we cannot let setbacks define us. This is our chance to be bold, to be different." His words resonated with the team, igniting another wave of enthusiasm. They began to share their own thoughts and frustrations, opening up about the difficulties they had faced. He guided the discussion, helping them refocus on their goals, reestablishing the shared vision that had propelled them forward. As they exchanged ideas, the atmosphere shifted once more, evolving into a sense of camaraderie and renewed purpose. The obstacles that had felt so insurmountable began to shrink in the face of collective resolve. After regrouping, they brainstormed ways to adapt their strategy creatively and efficiently. They focused on leveraging past successes, tweaking the campaign to better fit the current climate. And as they did so, that spark ignited again. The flames of hope flickered brightly as an unbreakable bond formed among them. Finally, the day arrived for their campaign launch. Mark stood in front of the team, their excitement palpable, his heart racing with anticipation. They were ready. Everything they had worked for culminated in this moment. As the campaign spread like wildfire across social media, the feedback was overwhelming. Engagement surged, the numbers were through the roof. Their message resonated with audiences, and they began to see the fruits of their labor blossom. Mark felt elated, watching as the brand he loved found its voice among the noise. Weeks passed, and the team navigated through the continuous flow of excitement. Their newfound confidence not only reflected in their project's success, but also in the relationships forged within the team. They celebrated victories together, big and small, creating memories that would last far beyond the confines of the office. As Mark sat in the same conference room where it all began, he couldn't help but smile. The trajectory of their project had shifted entirely, and so had his life. He had transformed from a shy worker waiting by the window into a leader at the head of the meeting table. And when Lisa addressed the group that day, she praised their collective effort. What a remarkable journey this has been. Your dedication and collaboration have breathed new life into this project. The applause that followed wrapped around him, warming his heart. In that moment, he realized that it wasn't just about the success of the campaign. It was about the growth they had all experienced. Change didn't just happen in a vacuum. It flourished when people rallied together, breaking down barriers, supporting one another, and daring to take risks. As he looked around the room, he saw faces filled with determination, laughter, and a shared sense of pride. Mark had conquered not only his fears, but the doubts that once held him captive. And he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, prepared to guide his team with the strength they had all built together. It was clear to him now, waiting was no longer an option. Life was full of moments that called for bravery, decisiveness, and action. He had chosen to step out of the shadows and claim his place, not just in this project, but in every facet of his life. As the rain faded into a distant memory, so too did the Mark who once stood trapped by the window. Today, he embraced the evolving narrative of his life with open arms, ready to face whatever came next, confident, empowered, and unapologetically himself. He waited by the window, watching the rain turn the street below into a swirling river. Outside, life carried on, people rushing past under umbrellas, cars splashing through puddles, and the sound of the city drumming away like a heartbeat. But inside, all Mark could feel was a heavy silence filled with anticipation. Today was crucial. It was the day that could change everything. He glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands moving steadily, each tick amplifying the tension that coiled tightly in his stomach. In just a few minutes, he would step into the conference room, a place that had become both a source of hope and a pit of anxiety for him over the years. The last few weeks had been filled with sleepless nights, flicking through research, crafting a proposal that he believed could turn the tide on his struggling project. But at this moment, the fear of failure overshadowed his preparation. Would they laugh? Would they dismiss him again? The self-doubt was an old, familiar friend, whispering in his ear, urging him to stay silent, to remain where it felt safe. Yet as he watched the raindrops race down the glass, he felt a flicker of determination. He couldn't stand by any longer. He had spent too much time observing, too many meetings where he had simply nodded his head in agreement. It was time to rise, to speak, and to make himself heard. Mark turned away from the window and stepped into the conference room. As the door opened, the familiar buzz of conversation dipped, and all eyes fell upon him. The room felt heavy with expectations, the air electric with uncertainty. Lisa, his boss, sat at the head of the table, her sharp gaze scanning the room, taking stock of the mood. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. As updates flew around the table, Mark felt the weight of frustration in the air. Complaints about missed deadlines and dwindling morale reverberated off the walls. Word pushed him closer to the edge of his seat. He yearned to jump in, to offer his ideas, but self-doubt wrapped around him, firm and unyielding. But then a moment came, a pause in the conversation where everyone looked slightly defeated. Seizing that moment, Mark raised his hand and cleared his throat. His voice wavered slightly, but it broke the silence. "Of course, go ahead," Lisa said encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, he plunged into his proposal. "I think we need to rethink our strategy. The market's evolving and we aren't adapting quickly enough," he began. He could see curious faces, a flicker of interest igniting within the group. "I've put together a plan that focuses on leveraging social media influencers to reach a younger audience. Engagement is key." As he spoke, he could feel their attention beginning to shift, the tension in the room lightening a bit. But then a voice cut through the budding energy. It was Alex, a colleague known for his critical nature. "That all sounds great, Mark, but how do we know it'll work? What if we invest all this effort and it flops?" Mark's heart raced at the challenge. The The familiar stranglehold of doubt threatened to pull him back into silence, but he had prepared for this. Every strategy carries risk, Alex. But isn't it riskier to stand still and do nothing? He could feel the room shifting, some nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. Undeterred, he pressed on. We've seen brands succeed by creating authentic connections with their audience. Let's be brave. To his surprise, Lisa chimed in. All right, I like where you're going with this. Let's break into groups and flush this out. Excitement coursed through him. Finally, it felt like a wave was turning in his favor. The small groups formed quickly, and as discussions ignited, ideas flew around the room. Mark felt like he was no longer standing on the edge. He was diving into the deep end, swimming alongside his teammates. He watched as people began building off his initial ideas, contributing their own thoughts and refining the plan. The energy crackled, the room filled with creativity and collaboration. It was exhilarating. The voices he had once stood behind were now leading the charge, and for the first time he felt like he belonged. After hours of brainstorming, they regrouped and excitement filled the air. Mark felt the thrill of possibility, validated by their shared enthusiasm. Lisa gathered them together to summarize. This is fantastic teamwork. Mark, thank you for stepping up and bringing us all here. Weeks rolled by, and what had started as an idea transformed into a polished campaign. Each day Mark felt more empowered. The timid man who had once sat by the window was now at the head of the meeting, and it felt liberating. He was immersing himself in all aspects of the campaign, working alongside his teammates, brainstorming and strategizing as if they were on an exhilarating adventure. But then reality hit. As the launch day loomed closer, tension rippled through the team. Disagreements over budgets, timelines, and execution began to plague their meetings. Concerns bubbled up, stifling the initial excitement they had all shared. Mark watched as team members became absorbed in conflict, frustration replacing creativity. During a particularly heated discussion, Mark felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. It was the same old doubt creeping back in like a thief in the night. Had he pushed too hard? Had he overstepped his bounds? He sat back, listening as voices rose and fell around him, a cacophony of uncertainty. That night, Mark returned home feeling defeated. He stood by his window, staring out at the rain-soaked streets. The familiar anxiety wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. He remembered all the reasons he had wanted to speak up in the first place, his commitment to change, his vision for the project, and the chance to make a difference for the team. But now it felt like they were sinking, not swimming. A storm of doubt brewed within him, threatening to drown his hopes. But then a flicker of resolve broke through the clouds. He needed to remind everyone why they had started this journey, why they had come together as a team. The next morning, he called for another meeting. As the team gathered, he shared his concerns honestly. I know we've hit some bumps in the road, he began, his voice firm but vulnerable. I've felt the weight of the pressure we're under, but I believe in this team and in our vision. The room fell silent and Mark leaned forward, the weight of conviction behind his words. Let's remember what brought us here, the passion that fueled our initial ideas. Slowly, he watched as expressions shifted. Colleagues began nodding and others spoke up, sharing their own frustrations and fears. It was a moment of catharsis, a return to vulnerability that reinforced their bonds. They were not just a team at that moment, they were a community. As discussions began anew, the energy gradually shifted with each exchanged word. Perhaps they didn't have all the answers yet, but they could find their way back to the path together. Mark guided them to brainstorm solutions, and this time they did it as a united front, weaving their ideas together like threads in a tapestry. After a few hours of collaboration, they rekindled their passion. The team marked new ideas, embracing fresh perspectives. Mark felt the excitement bubble over. It was a feeling he hadn't sensed in a while, but one he longed to hold on to. They were ready to adapt, ready to move forward as one. Finally, launch day arrived. As he stood at the front of the conference room, the atmosphere hummed with electricity, every face eager with anticipation. Mark felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was it, the culmination of their hard work. When the presentation began, the energy shifted again as they showcased their campaign, the innovative strategies, the engagement metrics, and the heart behind their message. As they unveiled their proposal, Mark felt his conviction grow stronger with every passing second. This was more than just a meeting. It was a celebration of their journey, a collection of ideas brought to life by the people who had fought for them. After the presentation concluded, applause erupted around the room. Mark leaned back, allowing himself a moment of relief and joy. All the hard work, all the struggles had led to this moment. Lisa smiled as she addressed the team. I'm incredibly proud of each one of you. You showed resilience and creativity in the face of challenge. In that moment, Mark absorbed the collective validation, knowing he had stepped boldly into his power not just for himself, but for the entire team. He had waited long enough, watched too passively as others took the lead. By embracing his own voice, he had helped forge a path of collaboration and trust. As the weeks went on, momentum built. The campaign launched successfully, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. engagement soared and they began to see real growth as their brand resonated with audiences. Mark reveled in the success, but more than anything, he cherished the relationships forged within his team. They had cultivated a vibrant, supportive culture where vulnerability and courage could thrive, creating an environment ripe for creativity. Through the ups and downs, Mark discovered that his waiting days were behind him. The man who once stood by the window had transformed a leader who had found his voice in the storm of uncertainty. Every challenge had marked him. Each step forward had broken a chain, shackling him to self-doubt. Looking around the conference room once more, filled with laughter and collaboration, he felt a sense of belonging. They were no longer just colleagues, they were a unit, a force to be reckoned with. He had taken that crucial step, that leap of faith, and it had changed everything. The road ahead might still be filled with uncertainties, but Mark was ready. Armed with the courage he had cultivated, he would continue to forge a path not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The journey awaited, and the man who once waited by the window had finally found his rightful place at the head of the meeting. He waited by the window, his heart pounding in rhythm with the raindrops tapping against the glass. Outside, the city moved in a chaotic dance, people rushing with colorful umbrellas, cars splashing through puddles and clouds hanging low, heavy with unspoken storms. But inside Mark, a tempest brewed, filled with doubts and hopes. Today was the day. Today could change everything. He glanced up at the clock on the wall, its hands moving too quickly, taunting him. The meeting was about to start, and with it, the opportunity to finally break free from the shadows. He had spent countless hours crafting a proposal he believed could turn their struggling project around, but standing there, he felt like he was teetering on the edge of a cliff, staring into the depths below. Memories flickered through his mind, times he had sat back and watched as others took risks, put their ideas out there while he remained silent. He could hear the laughter in the conference room ring hollow against his reluctance, reminding him of his own fears. What if they laughed? What if they dismissed him again? The thought gripped him so tightly he could hardly breathe. But then, as he continued to observe the rain soak the pavement outside, something shifted within him. He couldn't wait anymore. This was his moment to step into the spotlight, to take a voice he had buried under layers of insecurity. He turned away from the window, feeling the adrenaline course through his veins, driving him toward the door ahead. Mark entered the conference room, and the chatter faded as everyone turned their eyes toward him. The weight of expectation enveloped him, as palpable as the heavy air in the room. Lisa, his boss, sat at the head of the table, her expression a blend of authority and curiosity. She was a force of nature, and the way she commanded attention was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "All right, everyone," Lisa began, her voice smooth but firm. "We need to discuss where we're headed with this project." As she spoke, Mark felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Words like failure and setbacks echoed around the room, filling him with dread. His colleagues exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of resignation and fatigue. Mark's heart raced, whispering for him to speak up, but self-doubt clawed at him, digging deep like a persistent weed. Then a moment of quiet stuck. It felt like the calm before a storm. Mark could feel the energy shifting, the air crackling, the opportunity forming. He took a deep breath, the kind that steadied him and filled him with a flicker of determination. He finally said, his voice breaking the silence. It surprised even him. "Go ahead, Mark," Lisa said, nodding, the expectation glimmering in her eyes. With his palms damp and heart racing, he leaned forward. "I think we need a new approach. The landscape is changing and we can't keep relying on old strategies. What if we leveraged social media influencers to reach a younger audience?" He looked around the room and the initial silence melted into murmurs of surprise. Mark pressed on, feeling a wave of adrenaline kick in. With renewed vigor, he laid out the benefits of modern marketing, highlighting how audiences craved authenticity and engagement. Alex, one of the more experienced team members, interjected, skepticism lacing his tone. "We've tried big ideas before." Mark felt his stomach knot. Alex had always been all too good at deflating excitement. The familiar urge to retreat flooded him, but he remembered the late nights spent crafting this very idea, how hard he had fought to bring it forward. "Because," Mark replied, his voice steadier than he felt, "the world is different now. Brands that don't adapt fall behind." He could see a glimmer of interest flickering in the eyes of some colleagues, a spark of curiosity igniting as they began to mull over his words, but doubt still lingered in the air, thick and heavy. "Interesting," Lisa said, her brow knitting. With a chorus of frayed opinions fluttering around him, Mark felt the room swaying between skepticism and the possibility of change. Every venture carries risks, but sometimes you have to take a leap to grow. Drumming fingers echoed on the table, the room filled with a tangible tension. Then Lisa leaned back, her expression softening as she considered his pitch. "All right, let's break into groups. I want us to explore Mark's suggestion deeper." Mark felt a rush of elation as hands went up around the table, the energy shifting into something electrifying. They split up into smaller groups, and as conversations began to swirl, Mark could feel the excitement returning. At that moment, he realized that he was no longer just a passenger on this journey. He was driving the vehicle. Ideas flowed like water. The discussion morphed into something dynamic as everyone started building on Mark's initial thoughts. It was exhilarating. After 2 hours of collaboration, laughter, and brainstorming, Mark felt a weight lift off his chest. When they reconvened, there was a palpable buzz in the air. Lisa stood up, a smile breaking across her face. "This is what I'm talking about. I'm proud of this team for embracing change." Weeks turned into a flurry of activity. Mark became a whirlwind, managing the creative energy that now flowed through the team. They strategized late into the nights, calling on new influencers, refining their message, reanalyzing their audience. Mark felt as if he had levitated above the clouds, surveying the horizon filled with possibility. But as excitement turned into implementation, the storm clouds of doubt rolled in again. Budget challenges reared their ugly heads. Meetings turned tense, discussions filled with conflicting opinions seemed never-ending. Others questioned the worth of influencer marketing and pushed for safer strategies. The enthusiasm dwindled, and the passion that had once brought them together began to wither. One evening, as the team sat in a meeting rife with disagreement, Mark's heart sank further with every exchange. The light in their eyes faded as tough truths surfaced. What had started with so much potential now felt like a sinking ship. The weight of responsibility crashed over him. Had he led them down the wrong path? After the meeting, Mark sat alone, staring at the dimly lit screen on his laptop, feeling hollow as exhaustion seeped into his bones. Had he been too bold? Was he just a dreamer? The self-doubt replayed like a broken record, haunting every thought. He wanted to help them, to steer them to success, but the mounting pressure was suffocating. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, plagued by uncertainty. As the sound of the rain pattered against the window, he thought of the vibrant ideas, the sense of community, the joy in their collaboration. He remembered why he'd wanted to speak up in the first place. It was about more than just a project, it was about making an impact. Morning came, and Mark called for an impromptu meeting. He faced the team, his heart racing, uncertainty creeping back. "I know we've hit some hurdles, but we can't give in to doubt. We're all here for a reason, and I believe in this campaign. We need to attack our problems creatively, remember our passion for this project." A hush fell over the room, their skepticism hanging in the air, but slowly nods emerged, hands rising as colleagues began to share their thoughts. "What if we simplified our message?" one suggested. As discussions blossomed anew, Mark could feel the atmosphere shift. Ideas that had felt stifled began to breathe again, and energy surged like a battery being recharged. They rekindled that initial spark, unraveling a plan of action that involved creativity and strategy. Finally, the campaign launched. Dressed in his best suit, Mark stood at the front of the conference room, adrenaline coursing through him. Colleagues filed in, the excitement palpable, a collective breath held in anticipation. As he presented their refined concept, the energy in the room crackled with hope. Once more he could sense the optimism swirling anew. His voice grew stronger with each slide, showcasing vibrant visuals and compelling data. He saw eyes light up and smiles spread as they understood the potential of what they had created together. When Mark finished, an electrifying silence enveloped the room before applause erupted. He felt pride swell in his chest. He looked around at the smiling faces. They had worked hard for this moment. As they celebrated, Lisa's voice rang out, "I'm incredibly proud of this team." But just as the energy peaked, a wave of anxiety washed over Mark when he noticed Lisa's expression change. She turned serious, her brow furrowed. "But remember, we're only as strong as our execution." In that instant, the victory felt suddenly precarious, like a delicate glass teetering on the edge of a table. Mark's heart raced. There was still so much at stake. The journey they had just begun would require unwavering belief in each other. Could they rise to the occasion, or would they falter under pressure? And as they looked with renewed hope toward the horizon, Mark knew one thing for certain: it was just the beginning. In that moment, everything felt both exhilarating and terrifying. With possibility came risk, and he was about to find out if he could lead them forward together into the storm.